Shabbat Shalom. On this weekend given over to the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., my thoughts turn to the subject of leadership. In King's case, a pivotal turning point in his career. A fateful evening, January 27, 1956, in Montgomery, Alabama. King was a minister at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Rosa Parks had refused to move her seat, and the Montgomery bus boycott was underway. The violent threats being leveled against King and his young family were increasing in frequency and degree. A few days earlier, King had been given reliable information that plans were afoot to take his life. With his family fast asleep, the phone rang, and an angry voice began to hurl ugly racial epithets. The voice threatening, "We've taken all we want from you. Before next week, you'll be sorry you ever came to Montgomery." King hung up the phone, put a pot of coffee, and head in hands bowed over the kitchen table and prayed to God. In his book, Stride Toward Freedom, King describes what happened next, a scene made that much more vivid for me when I visited that kitchen table just a few years ago. King writes that he was ready to give up. His courage depleted, his family at risk. He contemplated how best to step aside. "I am here taking a stand for what I believe is right, but now I am afraid. The people are looking to me for leadership, and if I stand before them without strength and courage, they too will falter. I'm at the end of my powers. I have nothing left," he wrote. "I've come to the point where I cannot face it alone." It was at that moment, King writes, that he experienced the presence of the divine as he had never done so before. It seemed, he recalled, as though I could hear the quiet assurance of an inner voice saying, "Stand up for righteousness, stand up for truth, and God will forever be at your side." Almost at once, King reflected, my fears began to go, my uncertainty disappeared. I was ready to face anything. King's kitchen table conversion would be tested soon enough. 3 days later, a bomb blew up on the front porch with his family escaping by a hair's breadth. Time and again, King's leadership would be tested, from the bus boycott to the sit-ins to voting rights to urban poverty to Vietnam, the sanitation workers, and every civil right cause in between. A reluctant prophet who, contrary to his initial instinct and ultimately at the cost of his own life, followed his principles. A ministry, a leadership of courage and conscience for which we, this week and every week, honor and pledge to continue. This morning, we begin the second book of the Torah, Exodus, and with it, the story of our people's liberation from under the thumb of Pharaoh's oppression. For all of the story's implications, moral, national, theological, and otherwise, at its core, it's a call narrative, a tale of leadership formation, the making of our people's greatest leader, Moses. Long before King, Moses was the paradigm for reluctant leadership, an individual called to action against his will and better judgment. "Mi anochi, who am I?" asked Moses of God at the burning bush, "that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt?" Time and again in this week's Torah reading, next week's Torah reading, Moses deflects, demurs, and declines the call. "I have a speech impediment. I am not of the people." "God, you have the wrong guy. Pick someone else. You and the people are in need of a leader, but me, I am afraid." Every generation, our own especially and desperately included, is in need of leadership. It's worth asking the question, what exactly were Moses' leadership qualifications? What made him worthy of consideration? It may not have been self-evident for him, but for God and for those of us who know the chapter prior to the burning bush, we have evidence of what made him a worthy choice. Three scenes, three interrelated incidents worth exploring for Moses and for all leaders to this very day. The first scene, and our first introduction to an adult Moses, is when he goes out and bears witness to the oppression of a Hebrew slave, a kinsman being beaten by an Egyptian taskmaster. Having grown up in the comforts of Pharaoh's home, Moses had every reason to ignore what he was seeing. But the text explains that Moses looked this way and that way, and in a world of bystanders, he chose to be an upstander. Something was triggered inside, not just a sense of empathy, not just a feeling of kinship, but a call to action. Moses stepped up and struck down the Egyptian taskmaster. To see something and to do something, the threshold of entry, the baseline requirement for any leader. This scene alone may have sufficed to qualify Moses for leadership, but it was only the first step. The following day, Moses happens upon two Israelites fighting one with the other, and here too he intervenes. Why, he asks, do you strike your fellow? Despite his good intentions, Moses' mediation is entirely unwelcome. Who made you the boss of all of us, they ask him. Do you plan to kill us as you killed the Egyptian the other day? This second incident builds on the first. It's one thing to intervene on behalf of one's brethren, a muscle group Moses will need and then some when he confronts Pharaoh and all of Egypt. It's another thing to enter into the brave space of seeking peace between two quarreling kinsmen, a thought to which we will return soon enough. So we know Moses has empathy for his own, and we know Moses will step up when he sees two brothers at odds with one another. But it's a third incident that demonstrates the extent of his heroic empathy. On the run in a foreign land, Moses comes across Midianite maidens being harassed by the local shepherds. Vayakam Moshe, and Moses rose up, not only driving off the gang of shepherds, but also watering their flock. This is not just another biblical boy meets girl story at the well, or at least it's not just that. First, an act of empathy on behalf of his brethren, then an intervention between sparring kin, and now courageous concern on behalf of complete strangers. It's no wonder that the scene immediately following this one is that of God paying heed to the sufferings of the Israelites. It's no wonder that it was Moses who God would choose as a divine instrument to bring about Israel's redemption. Reluctant, yes, but even if Moses didn't know it himself yet, God knew, and the reader knows that he is a man who is constitutionally incapable of turning away from the sufferings of his brethren, who is willing to involve himself in the quarrels of his kin and put himself out there on behalf of those people who are not his own. And these qualities for which Moses was chosen are not just particular to him. They're the building blocks for biblical leadership from the very beginning. Why was Abraham chosen, the rabbis ask? Because unlike those who came before him, Noah, Adam, and otherwise, Abraham was the first to recognize that the condition of the world was his concern, the first to accept the obligation to step up to face injustice. In reflecting on Abraham's call from God, the Midrash provides the image of a man who encounters a palace engulfed in flames. Abraham's heroism was that he refused to walk away. At great risk to himself, Abraham sought to extinguish the flames consuming the world. Go forth to a land I will show you. Yes, father a nation as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sands of the earth, of course. But to be a Jew is a calling that extends beyond parochial self-concern. It's the through line beginning with Abraham, running through Moses and directing us to this very day. To see something, to say something, to do something on behalf of a suffering humanity. Given the news out of LA, the fiery images of houses and flames, it cuts close to the bone, and as a LA native, close to my own home. Homes, schools, shuls, livelihoods destroyed. Their suffering, our suffering. And now is the time, as you hopefully have seen in the synagogue emails, to do what you can do to help provide relief for the short and long-term needs of Los Angeles, a city in pain. And responsive as we must be to the suffering of others, the litmus test for Jewish leadership extends even higher and runs even deeper. In the case of Moses, his greatest leadership moment wasn't standing before Pharaoh, splitting the sea, or even for that matter, receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. The greatest test of Moses' leadership was when God sought to destroy Israel in the wake of the golden calf incident, and Moses interceded to stay God's wrath and argue Israel's case no matter their misdeeds. So too with Abraham. His greatest leadership test wasn't the wars he fought or the binding of his son on the altar. Abraham's greatest leadership moment was when he stepped up and stood up in the face of God's intended plan to destroy the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And while Abraham failed and Moses succeeded, it was a mere fact and courageous act of stepping into the breach, as taught by my late teacher Yochanan Muffs, that has since stood as the truest test of biblical leadership. To say it more simply, in answer to the question of why God chose Moses, why God chose Abraham, why God chooses anyone, it's that God wanted to pick someone who would be willing to stand up even to God. It's easy to rewrite Emerson, to live after the world's opinion, and it's easy to live in the solitude of one's own thoughts. But the great leader, Jewishly speaking, is the one willing to step into the breach, step into the fray, as Moses did with the clashing Hebrews, as Moses and Abraham did at the critical juncture of their careers. Not just the refusal to look away, not just the expressions of empathy for the suffering of one's own people and humanity, but the courage to step into that brave space that acknowledges the claims and counterclaims of two sides, all the while working to keep the two sides from tearing each other apart. That is the leadership requirement of this hour and every hour. We sit this Shabbat literally in the hours between the signing of a hostage deal and its hoped-for implementation. Emotions are high on all sides, and truth be told, there are truths to be told from both sides. Those who believe that the only impediment to this hostage deal is the cynical self-interest of the Prime Minister are, I believe, so engulfed by their hatred of him that they ignore the reality of Hamas, the murderous acts of the criminals who will be imminently released, the horrors of October 7th, and the clear and cruel tactics of Hamas, who would use hostages as pawns for the sake of their own preservation and as a means of psychological and actual warfare. And for those who believe that a hostage deal is either immoral or ill-conceived because it will give rise to future sin wars or somehow dishonor the lives of the soldiers felled in defense of the country, I would remind you that every single day that this war continues is but another day by which the seeds for future sin wars are being planted, another day by which the irreplaceable lives of young Israeli soldiers will be lost forever. There are no easy answers here, and it's intellectually lazy and irresponsible to act as if there are. We American Jews are but bit players in a drama taking place across the ocean at best, akin to Moses trying to resolve a fight between his kinsmen. But whatever one's politics may be, it's time for the hostages to come home. It's time for a ceasefire, for this forever war to come to an end. Time to think and work towards a day after. It's time to enter into that brave and uncomfortable leadership space that seeks the well-being of our brethren, the well-being of a suffering humanity, a Marshall Plan for Gaza's physical and political restoration. Last Saturday night, I stood in a crowd of Israelis in Jerusalem who in one and the same rally, in one and the same breath, both honored the heroism and mourned the lives of IDF soldiers defending Israel, all the while calling for a hostage deal and a ceasefire. We American Jews need to figure out a way to do the same because it's a right position to hold, because it's a position that will hold us together. Ours is a charged time. There are chilling voices and forces on all sides seeking to still voices of others. As the line from Wicked goes, if you make it discouraging enough, you can keep anyone silent. I know the feeling of having one's courage, clarity, and principles tested. Here in this community, here on this pulpit, we reject the comfortable allure of facile and false binaries in favor of embracing the uncomfortable complexities reality has dealt us. As King himself wrote, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. To defend our people, to hold empathy for the sufferings of all, innocent Palestinians included, to step up and be willing to stand in the breach, to dignify the uncomfortable truths of both sides, to bear the brunt of it all and persevere through the trials of the hour. In other words, to stand up for righteousness, stand up for truth, knowing God will be at your side forever. That is the model set before us by our tradition. That is a measure of leadership for you, for me, for anyone. That is a model by which together we will stay the course and stay together in this season of reckoning. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining the Park Avenue Synagogue family. I hope you enjoyed the sermon. Please consider supporting our online community by scanning the QR code or by going to supportpas.org or by making a donation. Shalom and see you in Shul.